I can never get the right one. There we go. How's everyone doing this morning? Oh, my camera. Hold on. That's doing that weird thing again. Da-ba-da-ba. Da-ba-da-ba. Gotta change that over. It's gonna change it quickly here. Oh. Whenever I want the right aspect ratio, I can never get it. Just change that down. There we go. There. There. That's a bit better. Do some clicking on the keyboard. Sorry about that. Yeah. So this morning, we're gonna do Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which is really, really cool reading. I really, really enjoyed this when I was in university. One of the coolest stories ever. Really was. So yeah, we're gonna be doing that this morning. There we go. I also have it up here on the screen so everyone can follow along if they want to, which is also really cool. I didn't do that the last time. It's kind of hard to follow along with the story when you don't actually know what it looks like. When you can't see the words sometimes. You want to see the words. Oh, my camera is Well, we'll just use this one. That's fine. It's working. So yeah, we're gonna do that. I have my tea. I'm ready. Okay, so with the Allegory of the Cave, I kind of talked about this one a little bit before in the last reading stream that I did. I love all of Plato's writings. He is a philosopher that really wants to understand like the lawfulness behind everything, behind society, behind people, whether they are, good, naturally good, naturally bad, where nature comes from. Plato is so interesting to me. I really love his writings. So the Allegory of the Cave kind of follows along with that. Like, he explains how human nature comes about through his analogy. And yeah, so we'll get into that today. I'm still super, super sleepy though. So we're gonna have a little bit of a sleepy voice this morning. That's okay. Kind of want to get myself closer to the mic so I don't have to speak as loudly to everyone. Just fix this. There we go. That's relatively sharp. I'm just gonna double check everything on my phone here just to make sure it all looks okay. Because you never know with these things. Sometimes you start a stream and then it just doesn't look right. Or like the screen share isn't working sometimes. Like it looks fine on my end, but then sometimes on the other end it doesn't look good. Or it's frozen or something's happening, so. There we go. Well, that looks fine to me. Okay. Okie dokie. Alright then, we'll get going here. So, Ba-dun-da. In terms of Plato's Allegory of the Cave, I'm gonna flip through here. I'm using a Kindle app, by the way. I love Kindle. It is the best thing ever. Oh yeah, we should probably read through these. Okay, so Persons of Dialogue. This is going to be kind of set at first as a story, and then as we get a little bit more into it, it kind of evolves into more of a play, which is kind of cool. So that's why it has Persons of Dialogue. So it has Socrates, who's the narrator, and then Glaucon, who's going to be one of the characters a little bit later on in the story. And then the scene is laid in the house of Cephalus at the Pyrrhus, and the whole dialogue is narrated by Socrates the day after it actually took place to Timaeus, Hermocrates, Critias, and a nameless person who are introduced in the Timaeus. So technically what they're doing is they're all sitting around, they're all chatting, and Socrates, who's actually, like, you know, Plato is writing Socrates dialogue. Socrates is telling this story to everyone who is around him, essentially. All right. All right, so we'll get into it. I don't know if my cursor shows up on the screen or not. Oh yeah, it does. It's kind of annoying. So I'll keep my cursor off. Alright, and now I said, let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold, human beings living in an underground den, which has a mouth open towards the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move, and they can only see before them, preventing by the chains from turning around their heads. Above and behind them a fire is blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised way, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way, like the screen which marionette players have in front of them, over which they show puppets. Alright, so this is the opening scene. For those who are like me and didn't understand this at first, there's people in a cave, the people are chained up in the cave, and there's fire casting shadows on a wall, similar to a play. I see. And do you see, I said, men passing along the wall, carrying all sorts of vessels, and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall? Some of them are talking, others silent. You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners. Like ourselves, I replied, and they only see their shadows, or the shadows of one another, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they were never allowed to move their heads? And of the objects which are being carried in a manner, they would only see the shadows? Yes, he said. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose they were naming what was actually before them? Very true. And suppose further that the prison had an echo, which came from the other side, would they not sure to fancy, when one of the passers-by spoke, that the voice which they heard came from the passing shadow? No question, he replied. To them I said, the truth would literally be nothing but the shadows of the images. This is certain. And now look again, and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and dispossessed of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which in his former state he had seen the shadows. And then conceive someone saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion, but that now he was approaching near to being, and his eye is turned toward more real existence. He has clearer vision. what will be his reply? And you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and inquiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? Far truer. And if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have a pain in his eye, which will make him turn away to take refuge in the objects of vision, which he can see, and which he will conceive to be in reality clearer than the things which are now being shown to him? It's confusing dialogue at first, isn't it? True, he said. And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a step and rugged ascent, and held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun itself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what he now is called realities. Not all in a moment, he said. He will require to grow accustomed to the sight of the upper world. And first he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men, and on the objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. And then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars and the spangled heaven. And he will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun or light of the sun by day. Certainly. Last of all, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of him in the water, but he will see him in his own proper place and not in another, and he will contemplate him as he is. Certainly. All right. So far, I don't know if anyone's following along here. Gets a little bit confusing. That's okay. So, taking a quick pause here. We're presented with a cave. People are chained up in the cave. And essentially what Socrates, or Plato, as he's writing, is attempting to portray is that people only see shadows which are cast about by the cave, because they're all chained up. And if they ever go outside of the cave, the sun is going to be too bright because their eyes aren't used to it. So they won't be able to look at the sun, they'll only be able to look at the ground in front of them. So they'll only see, again, what's in front of them. And then as their eyes adjust, they'll be able to see reflections in water. And then as their eyes adjust more, they'll be able to see everything around them. And then at nighttime, they'll be able to see very well, because nighttime is dark, very much like the cave. So that's pretty much what it's saying so far. So it's kind of like an analogy of, the realities around people. You can only see what's in front of you. And then if you try to look further beyond that, it's going to be a little bit hard till you get used to it, or till you become accustomed to it. So that's what's going on so far. All right, continuing on here. He will then proceed to argue that this is who gives the season and the years, and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world, and in a certain way the cause of all things which he and his fellows have been accustomed to behold. Clearly, he said, he would first see the sun and then reason about him. And when he remembered his old habitation and the wisdom of the den and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would facilitate himself on the change and pity them? Certainly he would. And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were quickest to observe the passing shadows and to remark which of them went before, which followed after, and which were together, and who were therefore best able to draw conclusions as to the future, do you think that he would care for such honors and glories, or envy possessors of them? Would he not say, Homer, better to be poor servant of a poor master, and to endure anything of rather than think they do and live after their manner? Yes, he said, I think that he would rather suffer anything than entertain these false notions and live in this miserable manner. Imagine once more, I said, such an one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation, would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? To be sure, he said. And if there was a contest, and he had to compete in measuring the shadows with the prisoners who had never moved out of the den, while his sight was still weak, and before his eyes had become steady, and the time which would needed to acquire this new habit of sight might be very considerable, would he not be ridiculous? Men would say of him that he went down and he came without his eyes, and that it was better not to even think of ascending. And if anyone tried to lose another and lead him up to the light, let them only catch the offender, and they would be put him to death. No question, he said. Then this entire allegory, I said, you may now append, dear Glaucon, to previous argument. The prison house is the world of sight, and the light of the fire is the sun. And you will not misapprehend me if you interpret the journey upwards to be the ascent of the soul into intellectual world according to my poor belief, which, at your desire, I have expressed. Whether rightly or wrongly, God knows. But, whether true or false, my opinion is that in the world of knowledge, the idea of good appears last of all, and is seen only with effort, and, when seen, is also inferred to be the universal author of all things beautiful and right, parent of light and the Lord of light in this visible world, and the immediate source of reason and truth in the intellectual, and that this is the power upon which he who would act rationally either in public or private life must have his eyes fixed. I agree, he said, as far as I am able to understand you. Moreover, I said, you must not wonder that those who attain this beatific vision are unwilling to descend to human affairs, for their souls are ever hastening into the upper world where they desire to dwell, which desire of theirs is very natural, if our allegory may be trusted. Yes, very natural. And is there anything surprising in one who passes from divine contemplations to the evil state of man, misbehaving himself in a ridiculous manner, if, while his eyes are blinking, and before he has become accustomed to the surrounding darkness, he is compelled to fight in courts of law, or in other places, about the images of the shadows of images of justice, and is endeavoring to meet the concepts of those who had never yet seen absolute justice. Anything but surprising, he said. Anyone who has common sense will remember that the bewilderments of the eye are two kinds, and arise from two causes, either from coming out of the light or from going into the light, which is true of the mind's eye quite as much as the bodily eye. And he who remembers this when he sees anyone whose vision is perplexed and weak will not be too ready to laugh. He will first ask whether that the soul of the man has come from the brighter life and is unable to see because unaccustomed to the darkness, or having turned from the darkness to the day is dazzled by the excess of light. And he will count the one happy in his condition and state of being, and he will pity the other, or, if he have mind to laugh at the soul which comes from below into the light, there will be more reason in this than the laugh which greets him who returns from above out of the light into the den. That, he said, is a very just distinction. But then, if I am right, certain professors of education must be wrong when they say they can put a knowledge into the soul which was not there before, like sight into blind eyes. They undoubtedly say this, he replied. Whereas our argument shows that the power and capacity of learning exists in the soul already, and just as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to light without the whole body, so too the instrument of knowledge can only by the movement of the whole soul be turned from the world of becoming into that of being, and learn by degrees to endure the sight of being, and of the brightest and the best being, or in other words, of the good. So I'll take another pause here. That's quite a bit of information, isn't it? So in this section here, they're talking about how people know what's true. So the people who are already walking in the light will know one truth. The people who are stuck in a cave or in darkness know another truth. Both truths are truths. However, if the light people go into the cave, they wouldn't be able to see the truths of the cave. And if the cave people go into the light of the truths, they wouldn't be able to see the light truths. So, both are true. It's just that people won't be able to see either side of them. So, what Plato is doing here, or what Socrates is doing here, is he's kind of equating it to the justice system. Whereas, people are sitting in court, for example, and they're going through a trial. Everyone is trying to tell their own truth, but you can't see their own truth in the court of law. You have to best explain your own truth and attempt to allow people to see your own truth. But that's not always going to be the case because they only know their own truth. So it's kind of interesting because there is no single person who knows an absolute truth. It's so cool. I love this stuff. No single person who knows an absolute truth. I like that. Alright. Okay, so we'll continue on here. Very true. And there must not be some art which will effect conversion in the easiest and quickest manner, not implanting the faculty of sight, for that exists already, but has been turned in the wrong direction, and is looking away from the truth. Yes, he said, such an art may be presumed. And whereas the other so-called virtues of the soul seem to be akin to bodily qualities, for even when they are not originally innate, they can be implanted later by habit and exercise. The virtue of wisdom, more than anything else, contains a divine element which always remains, and by this conversion is rendered useful and profitable, or, on the other hand, hurtful and useless. Did you never observe the narrow intelligence flashing from the keen eye of a clever rogue? How eager he is, how clearly his paltry soul sees the way to his end. He is the reverse of blind, but his keen eyesight is forced into the service of evil, and is mischievous in proportion to his cleverness. Very true indeed. But what if there had been a circumcision of such natures in the days of their youth, and they had been severed from those sensual pleasures such as eating and drinking, which, like laden weights, were attached to them at their birth, and which drag them down and turn their vision of their souls upon the things that are below. If I say they had been released from these impediments and turned in the opposite direction, the very same faculty in them would have seen the truth as keenly as they see and their eyes are turned to now. Very likely. Yes, I said. And there is another thing which is likely, or rather a necessary interference from what has preceded, that neither the uneducated and uninformed of the truth, nor yet those who have never made in their end of their education, will be able ministers of state, not the former, because they have no single aim of duty, which is the rule of all their actions, private as well as public, nor the latter, because they will not act at all except upon their compulsion, fancying that they are already dwelling a part of the islands of the blessed. Very true, he replied. Then I said, the business of us who are founders of the state will be to compel the best minds to attain the knowledge from which we have already shown the greatest of all. They must continue to ascend until they arrive at the good. But when they have ascended and seen enough, we must not allow them to do as they do now. What do you mean? I mean that they remain in the upper world, but this must not be allowed. They must be made to descend again among the prisoners in the den and partake of their labors and honors, whether they are worth having or not. But is this not unjust, he said? Ought we give them a worse life when they might have a better? You have again forgotten, my friend, I said, the intention of the legislator, who did not aim at making any one class in the state happy above the rest. The happiness was to be in the whole state, and he held the citizens together by persuasion and necessity, making them benefactors of the state, and therefore benefactors of one another. To this end he created them not to please themselves, but to be his instruments in binding up the state. True, he said, I had forgotten. Said Love, hey, how you doing this morning? Good morning. What is this? This is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Nixby, good morning. We're about 30 minutes into it, so might be a little bit confusing to some who are just joining right now. But good morning to you guys. Co-play games? Nah, it's too early. I'll do that later on today. I think this evening we're gonna play It Takes Two. So that'll be fun. Normally I play Warzone and this stuff. Play GTA roleplay. Yeah, that would be fun. I'd have to buy GTA, but I've seen a lot of other people playing it, so it looks a lot of fun. Are you a voice actor? No. No, I'm not a voice actor. I just enjoy reading. Thanks for joining, though. It's good to see you guys. Alright. I'm gonna continue on. Do you like Warzone? I do like Warzone. I've played Warzone quite a few times. Voice is sweet. Thank you. It's my morning voice. I'm still waking up. All right, I'm going to continue on here, guys. I'm more than happy to chat with you, though, if you want. Observe, Glaucon, that there will be no injustice in compelling our philosophers to have care and providence of others. We shall explain to them that in other states, men of their class are not obliged to share in the toils of politics. And this is reasonable, for they grow up at their own sweet will, and the government would rather not have them. Being self-taught, they cannot be expected to show any gratitude for a culture which they have never received. But we have brought you into the world to be rulers of hive, kings of yourselves and of other citizens, and that have educated you far better and more perfectly than they have been educated, and you are better to be able to share in the double duty. Wherefore each of you, when his turn comes, must go down into the general underground abode, and get into the habit of seeing in the dark. When you have acquired the habit, you will see 10,000 times better than the inhabitants of the den, and you will know what the several images are, and what they represent, because you have seen the beautiful and just and good in their truth. And thus our state, which is also yours, will be reality, and not a dream only, and will be administered in a spirit unlike that of other states, in which men fight with good one another about shadows only are distracted in the struggle for power, which in their eyes is a great good. Whereas the truth is that the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager, the worst. Quite true, he replied. No, this isn't the Bible. No, this is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So essentially what's happening so far in this book, at the beginning, Socrates He's a Greek, so Plato is a Greek philosopher, ancient Greek philosopher, and he's giving a story based on Socrates. And Socrates is an ancient philosopher as well. And essentially what's happening is they're talking about what is good in life. And not religious good, like truly good, justice good, like civilization good. So it's not the Bible. It's not religious. There might be a hint of religion in here, but everything is based on knowledge and how knowledge is power. So in the beginning, the dialogue is around people who are chained up to a wall. And all they can see on the wall, or they're not able to move, they're not able to move their heads, and all they see in front of them are shadows. And it's kind of an analogy for like how people go through life and they can only see what is in front of them. And then let's say one of these people gets away, they break free of their chains and they go outside of the cave and they're dazzled by the light and they can see everything for what it is. And if they go back into the cave and tell their buddies, hey, you know what, I saw something cool outside, you need to come out there, the people in the cave are going to be like, no, this is our truth, this is our reality. Oh, Coco. This is our reality. So, essentially, it's just like a huge analogy for people only see what they want to see, and they won't accept what is outside of their reality that they know. So in this part here, he's talking about people of Congress. So state leaders, for example, provincial leaders, mayors, anyone who's in a state of power needs to be able to lead their people properly. So for example, any of these state leaders will need to go out of their comfort zone and be able to see everything within the world. They need to be able to see all different views. They need to be able to see all different kinds of ways of thinking, ways of being, in order to properly govern a state. And only when they're able to properly see everything that's going on around them, they'll be able to properly dictate how the state should lead. It also kind of takes a jab at leaders as well, because the people who are most power hungry will only have tunnel vision and only lead based on their tunnel vision. So people who should lead a world, or people who should lead a state or a government of some sort, should be able to see all of the truth, not just the truth they want to see. So it kind of gives it a little bit of a jab at politicians, especially modern day politicians, since they only want to lead because they want their own truth. Good morning, Coco. I don't know if you guys can hear her, but she's playing with her bell right now. So that's essentially what's happening right now in this. It does seem kind of religious, but it's not religious at all. It's talking about how people should lead in a state. So it's pretty cool. But it's just boring reading for background noise, that's for sure. Alright. And will our pupils, when they hear this, refuse to take their turn at the toils of state, which they are allowed to spend the greater part of their time with one another in the heavenly light? Impossible, he answered, for they are just men, and the commands which we impose upon them are just. And there can be no doubt that every one of them will take office as stern necessity, and not after the fashion of our present rulers of state. Yes, my friend, I said, and there lies the point. You must contrive for your future rulers another and a better life, that is, than that of a ruler. And then you may have a well-ordered state, for only in the state which offers this will they rule who are truly rich, not in silver and gold, but in virtue and wisdom, which are true blessings of life. Whereas if they go to the administration of public affairs, poor and hungering after their own private advantage, thinking that hence they are to snatch the chief good, order there can never be, for they will be fighting about office, and the civil and domestic broils which thus arise will remain of rulers themselves and the whole state. Most true, he replied. And the only life which looks down upon the life of political ambition is that true of philosophy. Do you know of any other? Indeed, I do not. And those who govern ought not to be lovers of the task, for if they are, there will be rival lovers, and they will fight. No question. So yeah, they want people in office shouldn't be in office because they want to be in office. And in order to be just and fair, they need not to have any kind of attachments to life. Some deep stuff for, right in the morning here. Ba-ba-da. All right. Continuing on. Who then are those whose wisdom shall be compelled to be guardians? Surely they will be men who are wisest about affairs of state, and by whom the state is best administered, and who at the same time have other honors and another at a better life than that of politics. They are the men, and I will choose them, he replied. And now shall we consider in what way such guardians will be produced, and how they are to be brought from darkness to light. As some are said to have ascended from the world below to the gods. By all means, he replied. The process, I said, is not turning over an oyster shell, in an allusion to a game in which two parties fled or pursued according to an oyster shell, which was thrown into the air with the dark or light side uppermost. But the turning round of a soul passing from a day which is light a little better than night, the true day of being, that is, the ascent from below, which we affirm to be true philosophy? Quite so. And should we not inquire what sort of knowledge has the power of effecting such a change? Certainly. What sort of knowledge is there which would draw the soul from becoming to being? And the other consideration has just occurred to me. You will remember that our young men are to be warrior athletes. Yes, that is what that was said. Then this new kind of knowledge must have an additional quality. What quality? Usefulness in war. Yes, if possible. There were two parts in our former scheme of education, were there not? Just so. There was gymnastic, which presided over growth and the decay of the body, and may therefore be regarded as having to do with generation and corruption. True. Then that is not the knowledge which we are seeking to discover? No. But what do you say of music, which also entered to a certain extent into our former scheme? Music, he said, as you will remember, was the counterpart of gymnastic, and trained the guardians by influence of habit, by harmony making them harmonious, by rhythm rhythmical, but not giving them science. And the words, whether fabulous or possibly true, had kindred elements of rhythm and harmony in them. But in music there was nothing which tended to that good which you are now seeking. You are most accurate, I said, in your recollection. In music there was certainly nothing to the kind. But what branch of knowledge is there, my dear Glaucon? I have to look that up. Which of the desired nature, since all useful arts were reckoned by mean by us? Undoubtedly. And yet if music and gymnastic are excluded, and the arts are also excluded, what remains? Well, I said, there may be nothing left of our special subjects, and then we shall have to take something which is not special but universal application. What may that be? As something which all arts and sciences and intellectuals use in common, and which every first has to learn among the elements of education. What is that? The little matter of distinguishing 1, 2, and 3. In a word, number and calculation. Do not all arts and sciences necessarily partake of them? Yes. Then the art of war partakes of them? To be sure. Then Polymedes, whenever he appears in tragedy, approves Agamemnon ridiculously unfit to be a general. Did you never remark how he declares that he had invented number, and he had numbered the ships, and instead of array the ranks of the army at Troy, which he implies that they never had been numbered before, and Agamemnon must be supposed literally to have been incapable of counting his own feet. How could he if he was ignorant of number? And if that is true, what sort of general must he have been? I should say a very strange one, if this is what you say. Can we deny that a warrior should have knowledge of arithmetic? Certainly he should, if he is to have the smallest understanding of military tactics, or indeed, I should rather say, if he is to be a man at all. I should like to know whether you not have the same notion, of which I have this study. What is your notion? It appears to me to be a study of kind which we are seeking, and which leads naturally to reflection, but never to have rightly used. For the true use of it is simply to draw the soul towards being. Will you explain the meaning, he said? I have no idea what the fuck is going on right now. We're talking about numbers, I know that much. So essentially, I'm trying to understand this. Everything comes down to math, I guess, in life. If you don't know math, then you might fail in life. Everything's bound by math. Math is true. That's what I'm getting from this so far. Numbers are everything. Everything can be calculated. Nothing is chance, nothing is luck. Everything is meticulously calculated, essentially is what I'm getting from here. I think. I'm not too sure if that's right. Sounds right. Sounds right to me. Oh, my legs. Sitting too long. There we go. Alright. So we'll continue on here. Okay, let's try to figure out what they mean. Will you explain your meaning? He said. I will try, I said, and I wish you would share the inquiry with me and say yes or no when I attempt to distinguish in my own mind what branches of knowledge have this attracting power, in order that we may have the clearer proof that arithmetic is, as I suspect, one of them. Explain, he said. I mean to say that the object of sense are of two kinds. Some of them do not invite thought because the sense is an adequate judge of them, while in the case of other objects, sense is so untrustworthy that further inquiry is imperatively demanded. You are clearly referring, he said, to the manner in which senses are imposed upon by distance and by painting in light and shade. No, I said, that is not at all my meaning. Then what is your meaning? When speaking of uninviting objects, I mean those which do not pass from one sensation to the opposite. Inviting objects are those which do. In this latter case, the sense coming upon the object, whether then at a distance or near, gives no more vivid idea of anything in particular than of its opposite. An illustration will make my meaning clearer. Here are 3 fingers. A little finger, second finger, and a middle finger. I don't know which way they're doing. Little finger, second finger, Middle finger. Very good. You may suppose that they are seen quite close. And here comes the point. What is it? Each of them equally appears a finger, whether seen in the middle or at the extremity. Whether white or black, thick or thin, it makes no difference. A finger is a finger all the same. In these cases, a man is not compelled to ask the thought of the question, what is a finger? For the sight never intimidates to the mind that a finger is other than a finger. True. And therefore I said, as we might expect, there is nothing here which invites or excites intelligence. There is not. But is this equally true of the greatness and the smallness of the fingers? Can each sight adequately perceive them? And is no difference made by the circumstance that one of the fingers is in the middle and the other is at the extremity? And in like manner, does touch adequately perceive the qualities of thickness or thinness, of softness or hardness? And so of the other senses, do they give perfect imitations of such matters? It is not their mode of operation on the wise. The sense which is not concerned with the quality of hardness is necessarily concerned also with the quality of softness, and only intimates to that of the soul the same thing is felt to be both hard and soft. You are quite right, he said. And must not the soul be perplexed at this imitation, which gives the sense of hard which is also soft? What again is the meaning of light and heavy, if that which is light and is also heavy, of that which is heavy, light? Yes, he said, these imitations which the soul receives are very curious and require to be explained. Yes, I said, and in these perplexities the soul naturally summons to her aid calculation and intelligence, that she may see whether the several objects announced to her are one or two. True. And if they turn out to be two, is not each of them one and different? Certainly. And if each is one, and both are two, will she conceive the two as in the state of division? For if they were undivided, they could only be conceived as one. True. I don't know if anyone's following this. I'm getting a little lost here. Okay, so we have fingers. We started at the fingers. Each finger is individual. Nobody questions what a finger is. But the being of each finger has its own being. They're each an individual. If we didn't have three, there would be none, I guess. Trying to figure this out as we go. I'm so curious where this is going. The eye certainly did see both small and great, but only in a confused manner. Talking about clarity, yeah, that's a fair one. That's a very fair one. How can you clarify things? I would agree with that. The eye certainly did see both small and great, but only in a confused manner. They were not distinguished. Yes. Whereas the thinking mind intended to light upon chaos was compelled to reverse the process and look at the small and great and separate and not confused. Very true. Was this not in the beginning of the inquiry, what is great and what is small? Exactly so. And thus arose the distinction of the visible and the intelligible. Most true. And this is what I meant when I spoke of impressions which invited the intellect or reverse. Those which are simultaneous with opposite impressions invite thought. Those which are not simultaneous do not. I understand, he said, and agree with you. And to which class do unity and number belong? I don't know. I think I agree with you, Vader. I think it's definitely on clarity here. Think a little and you will see that what has preceded will supply the answer. For if simple unity could be adequately perceived by the sight or by any other sense, then, as we were saying in the case of the finger, there would be nothing to attract towards being. But when there is some contradiction always present, and one is the reverse of one and involves the conception of plurality, then thought begins to be aroused within us, and the soul, perplexed and wanting to arrive at a decision, asks, what is absolute unity? This is the way which study of one has power of drawing, converting the mind to the contemplation of true being. And surely, he said, this occurs notably in the case of one, for we see the same thing to be both one and infinite in multitude. Yes, I said, and being true, one of this being true, one must equally true of all number. Yes, I said, and this being true of one must be equally true of all number. There we go, I got it. Certainly. And all arithmetic and calculation have to do with number. Yes. And they appear to lead the mind towards truth. Yes, in a very remarkable number. Seems to be saying that you need division in order to understand individuality. Yes! That's a good analogy. I agree with that. Then this knowledge of the kind for which we are seeking, having a double use, military and philosophical. For the man of war must learn the art of number, or he will not know how to array his troops. And the philosopher also, because he has to rise out of the sea of change and lay hold of true being. And therefore he must be an arithmetician. This is true. And our guardian is both warrior and philosopher? Certainly. Then this is a kind of knowledge which legislation may fitly prescribe. And we must endeavor to persuade those who are to be the principal of men of our state to go and learn arithmetic, not as amateurs, but they must carry on the study until they see the nature of numbers with the mind only, nor again like merchants or retail traders, with a view to buying or selling, but for the sake of their military use and of the soul herself. And because this will be the easiest way for her to pass from becoming to truth and being. That is excellent, he said. Yes, I said, and now having spoken of it, I must add how charming the science is, and how many ways it conduces to our desired end, if pursued in the spirit of a philosopher and not a shopkeeper. How do you mean? I mean, as I was saying, that arithmetic has a very great and elevating effect, compelling the soul to reason about abstract number, and rebelling against introduction of visible or tangible objects into the argument. You know how steadily the masters of the art repel and ridicule anyone who attempts to divide absolute unity when he is calculating. And if you divide, then multiply, meaning either one, that they integrate the number because they deny the possibility of fractions, or two, that division is regarded by them as the process of multiplication. For the fractions of one continue to be units, taking care that one shall continue one and not become lost in fractions. This is very true. Now suppose a person were to say to them, "Oh friends, what are these wonderful numbers about which you are reasoning, in which, as you say, there is a unity such as you demand, and each unit is equal, invariable, invisible?" What would you answer? They would answer, as I should conceive, that they were speaking of those numbers which they can only be realized in thought. Then you see that this knowledge may truly be called necessary, necessitating as it clearly does use of the pure intellectual in the attainment of pure truth. Yes, that is a marked characteristic of it. And have you further observed that those who have a natural talent for calculation are generally quick at every other kind of knowledge. And even the dull, if they had had an arithmetical training, although they may not derive no other advantage from it, always become much quicker than they would have otherwise been. Very true, he said. And indeed, you will not easily find a more difficult study, and not many as difficult. You will not. And for these reasons, arithmetic is a kind of knowledge in which the best natures should be trained, and which must not be given up. I agree. Let this then be made one of our subjects of education. And next, we shall inquire whether the kindred science also concerns us. You mean geometry? Exactly so. I failed at math. That's for sure. I was never good at math. Yeah, individuality, multiplication. You need to know what's happening around you in order to understand what's happening around you. Alright. A few more here. And then we'll probably pause it for today. A few more pages. I'm actually really enjoying this, though. Seems like a conversation between nerds justifying why they're better off than the jocks in the Olympics. That is exactly what is happening. It is a conversation between philosophers and the court of justice, the people who govern the state, saying they're jealous of those guys in the gym. Knowledge is power to them. It's very true. Clearly, he said, we are concerned with that part of geometry which relates to war. For in pitching a camp, or taking up a position, or closing or extending the lines of an army, or any other military maneuver, whether in actual battle or on a march, it will make all the difference whether a general is or is not a geometrician. Yes, I said, but for that purpose of a very little either geometry or calculation will be enough. The question relates rather to the greater and more advanced part of geometry, whether that tends in any degree to make more easy the vision of the idea of good. In the thinner, as I was saying, all things tend which compel the soul to turn her gaze towards that place, where is the full perfection of being, which she ought by all means to behold. True, he said. Then if geometry compels us to view being, it concerns us. If becoming only, it does not concern us. Yes, that is what we assert. Yet anybody who has the latest acquaintance with geometry will not deny that such conception of the science is in flat contradiction to the ordinary language of geometricians. How so? They have in view practice only, and they are always speaking in a narrow and ridiculous manner, of squaring and extending and applying and the like. They confuse the necessities of geometry with those of daily life, whereas knowledge is the real object of the whole science. Certainly, he said. Then must not a further admission be made? What admission? The knowledge at which geometry aims, knowledge of the eternal, and not aught perishing and transient. That, he replied, may be readily allowed, and is true. Then, my noble friend, geometry will draw the soul towards truth, and create the spirit of philosophy, and raise up that which is now unhappily allowed to fall down. Nothing will be more likely to have such an effect. Then nothing should be more sternly laid down than that the inhabitants of your fair city should by all means learn geometry. Moreover, the science has indirect effects, which are not small. Of which kind, he said. It's interesting how they associate the soul with female her. Yeah, it is, isn't it? I think because I remember reading about it once, why Socrates and Plato, associate with the soul as her and feminine, because the soul is soft and malleable. It can be imprinted on, it can be changed easily, and yeah, something along those lines I remember them saying. Whereas men are hardened, men are determined, men are defined. Of course, in the Greek world. Women are at home, and men are out being hardened. So, in philosophy, they want to associate the soul to something that can be flexible, that can be changed, that can be malleable. But it's really, really interesting that the soul is a he or a she in general. Kind of makes it seem like it's a person as well. Like it has personal qualities, I guess, if you want to call it that. My soul is a dude. I would hope so. My soul is a girl, but I don't know. Somebody can easily change your mind. Somebody could change your heart. So I guess all souls are hers. Maybe? I don't know. That would be an interesting topic to talk about. That's for sure. Alright, there are military advantages of which you spoke, I said, and in all departments of knowledge, as experience proves, anyone who has studied geometry is infinitely quicker of apprehension than one who has not. Yes, indeed, he said, there is an infinite difference between them. Then shall we propose that, as a second branch of knowledge, which our youth will study? Let's do so, he replied. And suppose we make astronomy the third. What do you say? I am strongly inclined to it, he said. The observation of the seasons and months and years is an essential to the general as it is the farmer or sailor. I am amused, I said, at your fear of the world, which makes you guard against the appearance of insisting upon useless studies. And I quite admit the difficulty of believing that in every man there is an eye of the soul which, by other pursuits, lost and dimmed, is by these purified and re-illuminated, and is more precious far than 10,000 bodily eyes, for by it alone is truth seen. Now there are two classes of persons, one class of those who will agree with you and will take your words as revelation, another class to whom they will be utterly unmeaning, and who will naturally deem them to be idle tales, for they see no sort of profit which is to be obtained from them. And therefore, you had better decide at once with which of the two you are proposing to argue. You will very likely say with neither, and that your chief aim in carrying on the argument is your own improvement. At the same time, you do not grudge to others any benefit which they may receive. I think that I should prefer to carry on the argument mainly on my own behalf. Then take a step backwards, for we have gone in the order of the sciences. Take a step backward, for we have gone wrong in the order of the sciences. What was the mistake? After plain geometry, I said, we proceeded at once to solids in revolution instead of taking solids in themselves, whereas the second dimension of the third, which is concerned with cubes and dimensions of depth, ought to have been followed. That is true, Socrates. But so little seems to be known as yet about these subjects. Why, yes, I said, and for two reasons. In the first place, no government patronizes them. This leads to the want of energy in the pursuit of them, and they are difficult. In the second place, students cannot learn them unless they have a director. But then a director can hardly be found, and even if he could, matters now stand, the students who are very conceited would not attend to him. That, however, would be otherwise if the whole state became the director of these studies and gave honor to them. Then disciples would want to come, and there would be continuous and earnest search, and discoveries would be made. Since even now disregarded as they are by the world, and maimed of their fair proportions, and although none of their virtuosos can tell use of them, still these studies force their way by natural charm, and very likely if they had helped of the state, they would someday emerge into light. So essentially he's saying, if no one can teach you something that's important, then nobody ever is going to know anything that's important. Nobody can teach geometry. Nobody will know geometry. If nobody can teach you what the truth of life is, nobody will know what the truth of life is. Yes, he said, there is a remarkable charm in them, but I do not clearly understand the change in order. First you began with geometry of plane of surfaces. Yes, I said. And you placed astronomy next. Then you made a step backward? Yes, and I have delayed you by my hurry. The ludicrous state of solid geometry, which, in natural order, should have followed, made me pass over this branch and go on to astronomy, or motion of solids. True, he said. Then, assuming that science now omitted would come into existence if encouraged by the state, let us go on to astronomy, which will be fourth. The right order, he replied. And now, Socrates, as you rebuked the vulgar manner in which I praised astronomy before, my praise shall be given in your own spirit. For everyone, I think, must see that astronomy compels the soul to look upwards and leads us from this world to another. Everyone but myself, I said, to everyone else this may be clear, but not to me. All right. I had a bookmark here. That's heavy stuff. Sometimes these arguments are confusing. I really like, Plato's interesting because there's a really good there's a really good thing from Plato. Oh, my camera died. In which he's going through an argument and people are agreeing with him. Just changing my battery here. People are agreeing with him. Yes, you're right. I like your argument. But then midway through, Plato will be like, just kidding. Everything I told you is completely wrong. Plato's known to do that. Plato's known to fuck with people's minds. His stories are so interesting. I can barely follow along with them sometimes, though. I have to find that one. I don't remember, I don't exactly remember which writing script it is from Plato and Socrates. Plato wrote all of Socrates' scripts, but there's a really good one where, like, Play-Doh is also tough to get out of your carpet. Yeah, it is. It is tough to get out of your carpet. It's tough to get out of your hair. If you ever get it in your hair. Very tasty, though, Play-Doh. Nice salty Play-Doh. But yeah, he'll fuck with you. He'll tell you one thing and you'll agree with him because it sounds good and it sounds like a valid argument. And then he'll flip over and he'll say, no, I was wrong. Here's why I was wrong. And you're like, well, fuck, what is true? Ew. So, yeah. The allegory of the cave so far is really interesting. We started with people who are in a cave and they only know the truth of the cave. One of the people gets out of the cave and goes on to learn, like, oh, you know, there's stuff outside of this cave. And now we somehow got to talking about geometry and arithmetics and now astronomy. quite interesting. Started from something easy and now we're going to something hard. This is only going to get tougher. I think it will make sense at the end though. There's always a conclusion to these writings. Alright. So for now, I'm gonna pause here for today. I'll continue reading. Wait, what is today? Is today Friday? Today is Friday. I don't know if I think I'll continue the reading on Monday. I don't know if I'll do it at all this weekend. Tonight I'll play video games though. So for those of you who are here to watch me play video games, that will happen this evening. Anyways, in the meantime, thank you so much everyone for joining this morning and for going through this hella hard book. I love this kind of stuff. I love the Allegory of the Cave. I like the beginning part of it. The middle part of it is like kind of iffy for me, but I'm sure it'll make sense by the end. So there will be a part 2. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a good day, and I hope to see you on the next stream. Take care, everyone.